Here's a question. Why is this thing so bloody expensive? Thanks for clicking on my video, and whether you're a subscriber or just visiting, welcome. I'm going to start with perhaps a controversial statement, which is that guitars, and by that I mean all guitars, no matter how cheap, are a luxury product. The process for justifying a guitar purchase is different to, for example, buying a car. You buy a car to get to work in, to drive your family around in. You've got 5 kids, so you need a big car. You drive long distances, so you need a comfortable and reliable car. You tow a big trailer, so you need a powerful car. You've got a company image to defend, so you need a fancy car, and so on and so on. Unless you're a professional musician, and very few of us are, you don't actually need a guitar at all. The decision to buy any guitar and the decision to buy a nicer, more expensive guitar are both based entirely on preference and how much cash you're prepared to spend. In my last video, we looked at how brands like Epiphone and Squier managed to create guitars for such a surprisingly small amount of money. I'll link it in the description so you can check it out. Today, we're looking at the complete opposite. This is a Gibson Custom Shop 1958 reissue Les Paul Standard in the VOS finish, which stands for Vintage Original Spec. This is far from the most expensive guitar the Custom Shop makes, but it's still $5,000 or over £4,000 in the UK, which is a tremendous amount of money for most people to spend on a guitar. I'm not going to get into why you or anyone else would choose to do that. Today we're looking at why they cost this much money, especially when you consider that you could get a very similar guitar for around 1/10 the price. So let's get the specs out of the way. It has a mahogany body and neck. It has a 22 fret bound rosewood fretboard with the trapezoid inlays. It has a bound maple cap. It has 2 humbuckers, 2 volumes, 2 tones, and a 3-way selector switch. And it sounds like this. Now, the specs I just listed are true of an Epiphone Les Paul Standard. Nominally, the materials are exactly the same. Technically, however, they are not. I used to work as a senior buyer in manufacturing, just so you know I'm not talking out of my rear end, and I can tell you that materials have grades. Woods, metals, plastics all have individual designations that represent where they're from, how they're made, their strength, their chemical composition, and so on. It's not always as linear as best to worst, but if you take woods for example, there are dozens of different species of mahogany and mahogany-like woods. While Epiphone will use one of the more affordable variants, the Gibson Custom Shop will use not only a premium grade, but also the closest to what was used in 1958. This is a complicating factor because the Custom Shop are not only making a very high-end guitar, they're also attempting to replicate a guitar that was made 64 years ago. And 64 years ago, manufacturing was very different. Again, with woods, there are now laws in place governing what you can and can't harvest, what you can and can't import and export, and so on that weren't in place back then. And plastics were very different in the 50s. A lot of those old-style acetates and celluloses just aren't mass-produced anymore, so they have to whip up small batches to make the pickup rings, the switch tips, the knobs, and so on. And all of this drives up the price massively as compared to just using a standard modern plastic. And it's the same with metal parts. Epiphone will use a cheap pot metal with some chrome slapped on, whereas this is a period-correct nickel-plated alloy. And some of these metal parts were even made with the same machines they used back in the 50s. Now again, we're not here to talk about whether any of this period-correct fussiness makes for a better guitar. My point is, you can make a cheap guitar if your priority is to source the cheapest materials. If your priority is to reproduce a vintage-accurate guitar, that's a huge multiplier for your materials costs. And then you have the biggest cost in any manufacturing process, which is the labor. So obviously it costs a lot more to employ someone in the United States than it does to employ them in the Far East. And then the guys who work in the custom shop get paid more than the guys who work in the USA factory because they have more experience and expertise. And then, where the guys in China are spending maybe 10 hours to make a guitar, the guys in the custom shop are spending 20 or 30. And that's not because they're slower workers either. Now, if you've never played or held one of these and had the opportunity to check it out up close, you could be forgiven that this is basically the same guitar as a Gibson USA, and all you're really getting for your extra money is the bragging rights. Referring back to my first comment about luxury products, while it's true there are products on the market where what you're paying for is the ability to say that you can afford it, there are also a lot of luxury products where what you're paying for is a level of craftsmanship that you don't usually get with mass-produced consumer-level products. The craftsmanship here is present in a lot of hidden ways, like the really niche expertise it takes to select quality woods, to work with the adhesives and the stains and the nitrocellulose lacquer, to scatterwind these pickups, or to accurately copy a guitar that was made over 6 decades ago. But it's also apparent in the level of finishing. Again, I can show you, but you really need to touch and feel to understand how every millimeter of this guitar has been worked on by hand. And it's visible, but because this was done by a master craftsman, it's made the guitar better in a way that a machine never could, even though a machine would be technically more accurate. That's because 90% of the guitar is wood, and wood is a living, moving material, which is what makes every guitar unique, which is why each guitar needs a unique treatment. Like the neck carve is huge, but it somehow fits perfectly in the hand. These crisp edges on the headstock, the way the fretboard edges are rolled off ever so slightly, the perfect craftsmanship on these fret nibs, the flawless inlay work, the incredibly tasteful stain on the top, the subtle aging of the metal parts. I could go on and on, but I really urge you to go and try one of these for yourself. Put it side by side with the Gibson USA, which can be very good, well-finished guitars in their own right, and you'll see the difference. It's not for me to say whether that difference is enough to justify the additional spend to you. All I can do is explain why these guitars cost as much as they do, and it's not corporate greed, and you're not paying for something that you're not getting. I would in fact say that while it's amazing to me the quality of guitars that can be made these days for so little money, it's reassuring to know there's such a strong market for guitars made by expert luthiers that celebrate the history of their brand and the history of the electric guitar in general, and also give the customer the opportunity to afford them. Because let's not forget, while this might be 10 times more expensive than a Chinese Les Paul Standard, it's also 20 times less expensive than an actual 1958 Les Paul Standard. Now, you may not be able to afford this guitar yet, you may never be able to afford this guitar, or you may not even want to afford this guitar whether you can or not. And that's fine, there's plenty of other great guitars on the market that I'm sure will satisfy you. But if you're into vintage style Les Pauls and you want the absolute best you can get without spending house money on a real 1950s Les Paul, this is what you want. Thanks for joining me for this video. I'm sad now because I have to give this guitar back, but you can cheer me up by subscribing and clicking the like button if you've enjoyed watching. I hope to see you next time. Take it easy.